Right. Thank you so much. Yes, this works now. Thank you so much. Great to be in this panel with the Honorable Minister and our good friend as well from yesterday's discussion and before that in New York, Shania, and the Executive Secretaries here in the room as well. Very grateful to your help and support. So, how the whole thing started then? So, it came like this. We have the pipeline of projects. As an idea, for many years, this is not the first time the issue of having pipeline of projects is raised. I remember I was in Korea in 2010 as part of G20, and they said, well, we have the money. We need pipeline of projects to be funded. This was the G20, and the B20 were just starting at the time. This is the business community supporting the G20. That was in Seoul. And then, as I was mentioning in one of the sessions earlier, I had a discussion with Mark Carney, had this interesting piece on the country platforms. And then at the same time, the country platforms required, again, having a pipeline. In addition to other things like regulatory environment, supporting macroeconomic foundations to the rest of the story. Then we had a very interesting experiment led by the executive secretaries and the DSG with the Secretary General of the UN supporting it last year, or a year before we started this work. That was basically on the role of the extractive industry as part of the solution for building back better. The 5 executive secretaries, I appreciate their leadership. Rola and Olga, both of them are here, and the 3 other executive secretaries, they took this initiative seriously, the extractive industry one, and through the work, they managed to have decent public-private partnerships as a concept and as a support. They built on it, and there is a working group in existence functioning nicely at the UN. So the idea then is basically, you have this pipeline, you have the discipline of the UN, and the leadership and the coverage of the regional economic commissions of all of the developing economies and emerging markets. They are covered by the 5 regional economic commissions. And now we have the GFANs representing the private sector, have the climate champions, and when I was in Bonn, I shared this idea with the president of the COP, Minister Shukri. He said, well, it's difficult, but let's see how can we do it. So we made the design. I spoke, I think, by phone then in the same day from Copenhagen to the DSG, said a good idea. Why don't you share a concept note that we'll check with the SG if it is really something that we can be behind it. I'm just sharing that, not to brag about my work, but it's basically about this issue of how to bring concepts into reality, because many of us may have even more interesting, more practical ideas, but the mechanisms of getting the public to the private and getting that all mixed, the local to the international, how that going to be introduced to each other and get that through the kind of outcome that we had seen with the work. So it was the UN system, private sector, as I was putting in that memo to the SG through the DSG, because I'm envoyed to the Secretary General, one of things that I'm very proud to have, supporting him and his team for financing 2030 agenda. So it's basically, it's finance, it's getting climate close to development, it's SDG 17 at its best partnerships, it's linking the global to regional to local, and at the same time, giving a proper answer to this big question, we have the money, where are the pipeline of projects that we can trust? So for decent work, many thanks to the team, worked hard with us, starting with Addis, then, and the same week, we went to ISCAP, and you had the presentation from our colleague just now, and then went to Latin America. After that, it was Middle East, and then to the end where we had very good discussion in Geneva as well, not just on the matters related to the pipeline, but other matters related to the follow-up in the future. So for an implementation COP, we started implementing the idea even before it comes as a slogan. The other thing, the billions to trillions is not new as well. This came from my office from the World Bank with the MDBs back in 2014. But the projects are coming in size of millions to billions. But the trillions are basically backing us up. How to do that? I think having the first transactions and perhaps get some sort of discipline from the investment banks and the commercial banks, as mentioned earlier, getting that in country platforms, focusing on enablers, because here you will have the supply of projects and the supply of finance. You need then the connector at the country level and keeping at it. I remember very well when we are presenting the case of Pakistan, there was full ownership of the projects, and the Honorable Minister is here. That gave assurances to the financiers in the room. It's not one of those meetings that had nobody behind it. So let me get the details, and then I can explore the options with the ministry and their team. Let me just finish by saying what's next. This is the start of the work for COP27. We have a very practical COP coming as well, COP28, that started with very strong announcement from Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of commitment of $100 billion for joint investments with the US. So here the sources, I'm not just, while I'm chairing or leading the work with GFANZ Africa, for the work of the advisors for GFANZ Africa, any source of funding will be welcome. I wouldn't say, well, are you a member of the GFANZ Club or not? And I think the ministers will not really mind if the money is coming from IFC or from HSBC or from a regional fund, as far as it is going to be pushing this agenda forward. We are in a position and a situation today that we cannot really afford being ideological about where is the money coming from. We provide a very practical agenda for action here. There is a team working with us closely. Sagrika is here, Maz is here as well, and the rest of the team. I appreciate the work by BSG in getting lots of work behind that. It's fully owned by the UN system, and they have their own way as well of reaching out and providing credibility to the work. So it has many lives at the same time, owned by the champions, owned by the presidency and the UN system, but more importantly, these are projects owned by countries, prioritized by the ministers who are in the field, who are in the front line for action. Having said that, I cannot miss the opportunity by saying these projects, yes, they have their bias to mitigation, as mentioned by Ambassador Weil. They recognize resilience, and this is the second line of defense. Mitigation, the first line of defense. The second line of defense is adaptation. And I'm afraid globally, we failed in both. That's why we needed the loss and damage file, which will require us to have more projects to the pipeline, relying on insurance companies. What happened in Pakistan to our sisters and brothers there is a very strong reminder that we cannot just be academic. I'm academic, so I'm not taking any offense on that. But being academic, just yes, recognizing, putting reports, people are dying by their millions, and somebody would just have some sort of analysis for that. We need to be fast and practical about that new file that is being realized in the agenda. Yes, it's an African COP, but it's more an adaptation COP, but going beyond that in getting loss and damage seriously, but that requires finance, and this will require different type of finance, especially from the insurance companies and from the local community support that is required. Having said that, I'm very grateful to the leadership of the Secretary General of the DSG, and of course to the executive secretaries, the teams from the GFANZ, and my tireless team, though that you look tired from a distance here, on the champions and my front office. Thank you so much.